What happens when America's most beloved late-night host meets the world's most controversial royal? The answer will shock you, and by the end of this video, you'll understand why this interview became the most talked-about television moment of the year. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story gets wilder with every minute. The Late Show with Stephen Colbert had seen its share of memorable guests, but nothing could have prepared the production team for what was about to unfold on that crisp Tuesday evening. Stephen Colbert, known for his sharp wit and ability to navigate even the most challenging interviews with grace, was about to face his greatest test yet. Meghan Markle arrived at the Ed Sullivan Theater with her usual entourage. But something felt different from the moment she stepped through the doors. The energy was electric, charged with an undercurrent of tension that even the seasoned crew members couldn't ignore. She wore a stunning navy blue dress that commanded attention, her posture radiating confidence as she made her way to the green room. "She's been pacing for 20 minutes, whispered one of the producers to another as they watched through the monitor. "Never seen anything like it." Stephen, meanwhile, was in his dressing room, going over his notes one final time. He had prepared extensively for this interview, knowing that Meghan's appearances were always unpredictable. The questions were carefully crafted, designed to be probing yet respectful, the kind of balance that had made him one of television's most trusted interviewers. The audience was buzzing with anticipation as they took their seats. Word had somehow leaked that this wasn't going to be a typical promotional interview. Phones were confiscated more thoroughly than usual, and additional security personnel were stationed throughout the theater. Something big was about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Meghan Markle," Stephen announced with his trademark smile as the band struck up their welcoming tune. Meghan emerged from backstage, waving to the crowd with practiced precision, but those who knew her well could see the subtle signs of tension in her shoulders, the slight tightness around her eyes. She settled into the guest chair, crossing her legs elegantly and offering Stephen a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you for having me, Stephen. It's wonderful to be here." "The pleasure is all ours," Stephen replied, his voice warm but professional. "Now, I have to say, you've been making quite a few headlines lately. Some people love what you're doing. Others, well, they're not so thrilled. How do you handle that kind of polarized response?" Meghan's smile flickered for just a moment. "Well, Stephen, I think when you're trying to make real change in the world, there are always going to be people who resist that change. The question is whether you're going to let their resistance stop you from doing what's right." "That's a very diplomatic answer," Stephen said, leaning forward slightly, "but I'm curious about something more specific. There have been some reports about your approach to certain charitable organizations, some criticism about whether your methods are as effective as they could be. What's your response to that?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Meghan's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly, and her voice took on a sharper edge. "I find it interesting, Stephen, that when a woman, particularly a woman of color, tries to innovate in the philanthropic space, suddenly everyone becomes an expert on what she should be doing differently." Stephen raised an eyebrow, sensing the shift in tone. "I don't think anyone's questioning your right to innovate. The concerns seem to be more about transparency and measurable outcomes. These are legitimate questions that any public figure engaged in charitable work might face." "Legitimate according to whom?" Meghan shot back, her voice rising slightly. "According to the same media that has spent years trying to tear me down. According to people who have never walked in my shoes or faced the challenges I've faced." The audience was completely silent now, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Stephen, to his credit, maintained his composure, but there was a new intensity in his eyes. "Meghan, I respect everything you've been through, I really do. But when you put yourself in the public eye, when you ask for public support and donations, don't you think the public has a right to ask questions about how those resources are being used?" Meghan's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You know what, Stephen? I came here tonight thinking we were going to have an honest conversation. But I can see now that this is just another attempt to put me in my place, to make me justify my existence to people who were never going to support me anyway." "That's not what this is," Stephen said firmly. "This is journalism. This is asking the kinds of questions that help people make informed decisions about who and what they support. Journalism." Meghan's voice was incredulous now. Is that what you call it when you invite someone onto your show under the pretense of promoting their work, only to ambush them with gotcha questions designed to make them look bad? The tension was palpable. Stephen's jaw tightened slightly, the first crack in his professional demeanor. Nobody ambushed you here, Meghan. These are questions that have been raised in multiple reputable publications. I'm giving you the opportunity to address them directly. Reputable publications, Meghan repeated mockingly. You mean the same publications that have been complicit in the harassment campaign against me and my family? The same ones that published lies and call it news? Some of these concerns have been raised by former colleagues, Stephen pressed on. People who worked with you directly. Are you saying they're all lying? Meghan's eyes flashed dangerously. I'm saying that when people are paid enough, when they're promised enough, they'll say whatever they need to say to get ahead. And apparently, tearing down someone who's trying to make a difference is profitable these days. The audience was beginning to shift uncomfortably in their seats. This was far beyond the usual playful banter of a late-night talk show. Stephen realized he was at a crossroads. He could back down and try to steer the conversation to safer ground. Or he could continue pursuing the truth, regardless of how uncomfortable it made his guest. He chose the latter. Meghan, I understand you're frustrated, but dodging these questions doesn't make them go away. If there's nothing to hide, if these concerns are baseless, then why not just answer them directly? Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that echoed through the silent studio. I don't have to justify anything to you, Stephen. Not to you, not to your audience, and certainly not to the people who are determined to see me fail no matter what I do. Stephen remained seated, his voice calm but firm. Actually, Meghan, when you're asking for public trust and public money, you do have to justify your actions. That's how democracy works. That's how accountability works. Accountability. Meghan's voice was reaching a fever pitch now. Where was the accountability when your precious media was publishing stories about me that weren't true? Where was the accountability when they were invading my privacy, stalking my friends, making my life hell? Two wrongs don't make a right, Stephen replied evenly. And I'm not responsible for what other media outlets do. I'm responsible for what happens on this show. And on this show, we ask tough questions. That's what our viewers expect. Meghan turned to face the audience directly, her voice dripping with disdain. Is that what you expect? Do you really want to be part of this? Do you want to watch someone get torn down for trying to make the world better? The audience was frozen, unsure how to respond to this unprecedented breach of late-night television protocol. Stephen stood up now, his patience finally wearing thin. Meghan, please sit down, Stephen said, his voice carrying a new authority that cut through the charged atmosphere. We're not tearing anyone down here. We're having a conversation that millions of people have been wanting to have. But Meghan wasn't backing down. She remained standing, her eyes blazing as she faced the audience. A conversation. This is an interrogation disguised as entertainment. This is exactly the kind of behavior that drove me and my husband away from everything we knew. And yet here you are, Stephen pointed out, his composure cracking slightly. You chose to come on this show. You chose to put yourself back in the spotlight. If you can't handle the questions that come with that choice, then maybe you shouldn't have made it. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Meghan turned slowly back to face Stephen, her expression shifting from anger to something more dangerous, something calculating. You know what, Stephen? You're absolutely right. I did choose to come here. I chose to give you and your show the privilege of my presence, but what I didn't choose was to be disrespected by someone who clearly doesn't understand the first thing about what I've been through. I understand more than you think, Stephen replied, his voice steady, but with an edge. I understand that with great privilege comes great responsibility. I understand that when you have a platform, you have an obligation to use it wisely. Privilege. Meghan's laugh was harsh and incredulous. You want to talk about privilege? Let's talk about your privilege, Stephen. The privilege of sitting in your comfortable chair, in your comfortable studio, judging people whose struggles you've never had to face. My struggles are different from yours. That's true, Stephen acknowledged. But that doesn't mean I can't ask legitimate questions about public figures who influence millions of people. Legitimate questions, Meghan repeated, shaking her head. You keep using that word. But what's legitimate about trying to humiliate someone on national television? What's legitimate about setting someone up to fail? The audience was completely transfixed now, watching this verbal tennis match between two master communicators, each one trying to land the decisive blow. The camera operators were having trouble keeping up with the rapid back-and-forth movement. "I'm not trying to humiliate you," Stephen said, his frustration finally beginning to show. "I'm trying to get honest answers to honest questions. But every time I ask something you don't like, you deflect, you attack. You make it about everything, except the actual issue at hand. The actual issue." Meghan's voice rose again. "The actual issue is that you and people like you have decided that I don't deserve basic human respect. The actual issue is that you think you can treat me however you want because I'm famous." "That's not true, and you know it," Stephen shot back. "I treat all my guests with respect, but I also ask all my guests tough questions. That's what journalism is. That's what holding people accountable looks like." "Accountability," Meghan said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Where was your accountability when the media was publishing racist cartoons about my son? Where was your accountability when they were making up stories about me being difficult and demanding?" "I can't control what other people publish," Stephen said firmly, "but I can control what happens on my show, and what happens on my show is that we ask the questions that need to be asked, regardless of who's asking them or who's being asked." "And what gives you the right to decide what questions need to be asked?" Meghan demanded. "What makes you the arbiter of what's important and what's not?" "The same thing that gives you the right to decide what causes are worth supporting," Stephen replied without missing a beat. "The same thing that gives you the right to speak out on issues you care about. It's called freedom of speech, and it works both ways." Meghan's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Don't you dare lecture me about freedom of speech, not when your industry has used that freedom to systematically destroy people who don't fit your narrative. My industry." Stephen's voice was getting louder, now his famous calm beginning to crack. "You want to talk about industries. What about your industry, Meghan? What about the industry of celebrity activism, where good intentions somehow excuse poor execution?" The gloves were officially off now. Meghan stepped closer to Stephen's desk, her voice low and threatening. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You sit here in your ivory tower making jokes and collecting paychecks, while some of us are actually trying to change the world." Change the world. Stephen stood up straighter, matching her intensity. "By what measure? What concrete, measurable change have you actually accomplished? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a lot of talking and not much doing." The audience gasped audibly. This was territory that late-night television had never ventured into before. The producers in the control room were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial. But the sheer unprecedented nature of what they were witnessing kept them frozen. "How dare you?" Meghan whispered, her voice shaking with rage. "How dare you minimize the work I've done, the lives I've touched, the people I've helped?" "I'm not minimizing anything," Stephen said, his voice rising to match hers. "I'm asking for proof. I'm asking for evidence. I'm asking for the kind of transparency that any responsible organization would provide." "Transparency?" Meghan laughed bitterly. "You want transparency? Here's some transparency for you. This whole interview was a setup from the beginning. Your producers, your researchers, they didn't want to discuss my work. They wanted to create a moment, a viral clip, something they could use to boost your ratings." "That's absolutely not true," Stephen said firmly. "Every question I've asked tonight is based on legitimate concerns that have been raised by credible sources." "Credible sources?" Meghan scoffed. "Like who?" "Disgruntled former employees who were let go for incompetence. Tabloid journalists who make their living destroying people's reputations." "Like charity watchdog organizations," Stephen countered. "Like financial transparency advocates. Like people who actually care about making sure charitable donations go where they're supposed to go." "And you believe them over me?" Meghan asked, her voice incredulous. "You believe anonymous sources and biased organizations over someone who's actually doing the work?" "I believe in verification," Stephen said coldly. "I believe in evidence. I believe in holding everyone to the same standard, regardless of their status or their sob story." The words hit Meghan like a physical blow. Her face went pale, then flushed red with anger. "Sob story? You think my experiences, my trauma, my family's suffering is a sob story?" Stephen realized he had gone too far, But there was no taking it back now. I think your experiences are real and valid, but I also think they don't give you a free pass to avoid legitimate scrutiny. Legitimate scrutiny, Meghan repeated, her voice barely controlled. Is that what you call this character? Assassination. Is that what you call this public humiliation? I call it journalism, Stephen said firmly. I call it doing my job, your job. Meghan's voice was reaching a breaking point. Your job is to entertain people, Stephen. Your job is to make them laugh and forget about their problems for an hour. Your job is not to destroy people's lives for ratings. My job is to inform people, Stephen shot back. My job is to ask the questions that need to be asked. And sometimes those questions make people uncomfortable. Sometimes they make people angry. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't be asked. Meghan was trembling now. Whether from anger or something else entirely, it was impossible to tell. You know what, Stephen? You're right. You are doing your job. You're doing exactly what they pay you to do. You're tearing down someone who threatens the status quo, someone who refuses to stay in her lane. Nobody's asking you to stay in any lane, Stephen said, his voice softer now but still firm. We're just asking you to be accountable for the lane you've chosen. The studio was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Every person in that room knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. The question was no longer what would happen next, but how much further this could possibly go. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before Meghan finally spoke, her voice dangerously quiet. You know what the real tragedy is here, Stephen? It's that you actually think you're the good guy in this scenario. Stephen's jaw tightened. I'm not trying to be the good guy or the bad guy. I'm trying to be a journalist. A journalist. Meghan's voice cracked with disbelief. Journalists report facts, Stephen. They don't create hit pieces disguised as interviews. They don't ambush their guests with gotcha questions designed to make them look bad. Every question I've asked has been fair and based on documented concerns, Stephen insisted, but his voice was losing some of its earlier conviction. Fair. Meghan laughed, but there was no humor in it. Was it fair when you implied that my charitable work was ineffective? Was it fair when you suggested that everyone who's worked with me is lying? Was it fair when you called my life experience as a sob story? The last words came out like bullets, each one hitting its target with devastating precision. Stephen winced visibly, knowing he had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I shouldn't have used those words, he admitted quietly. That was wrong of me. Oh, now you want to apologize? Meghan's voice was rising again. Now that you've accomplished what you set out to do, now that you've gotten your viral moment, that's not what this was about, Stephen protested. But even he seemed to be questioning his own motives now. Then, what was it about? Meghan demanded, stepping even closer to his desk. What was the point of all this? What did you hope to accomplish by tearing me down on national television? Stephen opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. For the first time in his career, the master of quick wit seemed genuinely speechless. I'll tell you what this was about, Meghan continued, her voice gaining strength. This was about putting me in my place. This was about reminding me that no matter what I do, no matter how hard I try, there will always be people like you ready to tear me down. That's not true, Stephen said weakly, but the conviction was gone from his voice. Isn't it? Meghan's eyes were blazing now. Then explain to me why every single question tonight was designed to make me look bad. Explain to me why you didn't ask about the successful programs, the lives that have been changed, the real impact we've made. Because those weren't the questions that needed to be asked, Stephen said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. According to who? Meghan shot back. According to your producers. According to your writers. According to the same people who thought it would be entertaining to watch a woman of color get destroyed on television. The racial dimension of the conflict was now front and center, something that had been simmering beneath the surface throughout the entire exchange. The audience was visibly uncomfortable, some people shifting in their seats, others looking like they wanted to leave. This has nothing to do with race, Stephen said firmly, trying to regain some control of the situation. Doesn't it? Meghan's voice was sharp as a blade. Would you have asked these same questions this way if I were a white woman? Would you have been this aggressive, this dismissive, this determined to prove that I'm somehow unworthy of basic respect? Stephen's face reddened. I ask tough questions of everyone, regardless of their race or gender. Do you? Meghan challenged. Because I've watched your show, Stephen. I've seen how you interview white celebrities, white politicians, white activists. I've seen the deference, the respect, the benefit of the doubt that you give them. And then I see how you're treating me tonight. You're being paranoid, Stephen said, but his voice was losing strength with every word. Am I? Meghan's voice was deadly quiet now. Or am I just being honest about what's happening here? About what's been happening to me for years? The control room was in chaos. Producers were shouting into headsets, trying to decide whether to cut the feed, but the unprecedented nature of what was unfolding kept everyone frozen in place. Look, Stephen said, trying to regain some semblance of control, maybe we should take a step back here. Maybe we should try to find some common ground. Common ground? Meghan laughed bitterly. You spend 30 minutes trying to destroy my reputation, and now you want to find common ground. You call my life experiences a sob story, and now you want to play nice. I apologized for that, Stephen said desperately. You apologized after you realized how bad it made you look, Meghan corrected. Not because you actually meant it. Not because you actually understood why it was wrong. Stephen was sweating now, clearly out of his depth. Meghan, please, can we just try to have a civil conversation? Civil. Meghan's voice was incredulous. You want to talk about civility? After what you've done here tonight, after how you've treated me. I've treated you the same way I treat all my guests, Stephen insisted, but his voice was shaking now. No, you haven't, Meghan said firmly, and deep down you know it. Deep down you know that you came into this interview with your mind already, made up about who I am and what I deserve. Stephen looked around the studio desperately, as if hoping someone would rescue him from this nightmare. But there was no escape. The cameras were still rolling, the audience was still watching, and Meghan wasn't finished. You want to know what the real problem is here, Stephen? She continued. The real problem is that you and people like you can't handle the fact that I refuse to be quiet. You can't handle the fact that I won't just disappear and let you control the narrative about my life. That's not what this is about, Stephen said weakly. Then what is it about? Meghan demanded. Because, from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trying to silence someone who's been speaking truth to power. It looks like you're trying to destroy someone who's been fighting for people who don't have a voice. Stephen was completely on the defensive now, his famous quick wit abandoned in favor of desperate damage control. I'm not trying to silence anyone. I'm just trying to ask important questions. Important to who? Meghan shot back. Important to your viewers. Or important to the people who want to see me fail. The question hung in the air like an accusation. Stephen looked around the studio again, seeing his crew members avoiding eye contact, seeing audience members looking uncomfortable and confused. Think, he said slowly, maybe we should end this interview here. Oh, now you want to end it? Meghan's voice was triumphant. Now that you've realized you've bitten off more than you can chew, now that you've realized I'm not going to just sit here and take your abuse. It's not abuse, Stephen protested, but his voice was barely audible, isn't it? Meghan asked. What would you call it then? What would you call spending half an hour trying to tear someone down on national television? Stephen had no answer. For the first time in his career, the man who always had the last word was completely speechless. Meghan looked around the studio one final time, her gaze sweeping over the audience, the crew, and finally settling back on Stephen. You know what? Stephen, thank you. Thank you for showing everyone exactly what I've been dealing with for years. Thank you for proving every point I've ever made about the way women like me are treated by the media. She began to walk toward the exit, her head held high despite everything that had just happened. The audience was still frozen, unsure whether to applaud or sit in stunned silence. Meghan, wait, Stephen called out, but his voice was weak and desperate. She turned back one final time. No, Stephen, I'm done waiting. I'm done trying to prove my worth to people who will never see it. I'm done playing by rules that were designed to keep people like me quiet. And with that, she walked off the stage, leaving Stephen Colbert standing alone in front of a studio full of shocked faces and rolling cameras. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Security quickly escorted Meghan from the building while Stephen tried desperately to salvage what was left of the interview, but the damage was done. The most respected voice in late-night television had been left speechless by a woman who refused to be silenced, What started as a routine celebrity interview had become something unprecedented in television history, a moment that would be analyzed, debated, and remembered for years to come. The question everyone was asking was simple: who was really in the right? Make sure to subscribe to stay updated on the biggest celebrity stories and drop a comment below with your thoughts. Do you think Stephen Colbert crossed the line? Or was Meghan Markle being too defensive? Let me know what you think happened in that studio.